Tuffy, and this is a post for my Facebook friends and Twitter. At the park with my dog, and we're waiting for some other people's doggies to come around. But meanwhile, I thought while I'm waiting, I would post this. So you kind of have to forgive me with the wind and everything blowing around. But here's the deal: there's a ton of Democrats blaming Republicans for this, that, and the other, and vice versa. Liberals blaming conservatives and vice versa. And it's getting annoying. To give everybody a heads, I get a lot of controversy on my Facebook, but I have been in the news business for near about 30 years. And I started in real news, the truth of what real hardcore news is, shooting live events. And I also worked for one of the first reality TV shows that came about. It was Hard Copy back in the day. A lot of you may be too young to remember that show. But I want to give you an idea of what fake news does. Back in the day, the show Inside Edition was like the biggest show, and Current Affair with Maury Povich, they had the biggest ratings. So here comes Hard Copy. And people in the news industry and TV just got a job. We were just working and trying to make a living. That's all we were doing. But Hard Copy was of a different animal. And I don't know how many shows came along to try to beat out Current Affair and Inside Edition. None of them did. They never could. They were just too good, to be honest. But Hard Copy was backed by Paramount Pictures, and its sister show was Entertainment Tonight. So we're talking about a lot of power behind the scenes that people never thought. Hard Copy was considered a news broadcast television show, meaning it had been licensed by the FCC. So we had the same access to all kinds of information that a regular news station would have. Here, I specialized in interviews that people couldn't get. I specialized in crimes of passion, murders, and politics. Yeah. By the time Hard Copy got to stories that had made nationwide news, the actual families rarely wanted to interview because they had already been bombarded by the local news and then national regular news stations. Then all of a sudden you got the big shows calling. But I want to give you an example, a really good example of manipulation. The story that I was doing, it was a man whose daughter was murdered by the next door neighbor. He had a crush on her, and everyone just thought they were great friends, and he couldn't have her, so he murdered her. Well, it was a big news story, and by the time I got to the man, he was tired from all the pounding of the news and all this stuff. But he said to me, he goes, you know what? He goes, you seem really genuine. He goes, I'll tell you what. He goes, you can come interview me. I'll give you the lowdown on everything. He goes, the only thing I want is to please do not film my daughter's funeral, which is 2 days from now. He goes, that I just don't want. So I told him, I said, okay, look, I said, that's what we're going to do, and I appreciate it. So we hang up. I run upstairs to the executive producer, and I told him, I said, hey, I got the story that you guys are wanting. There were like 7 people that had tried to get him to interview, and it was no, no, no. And then I was able to get him to interview. So I was so stoked and happy. And so I'm walking out of the executive producer's office, and he goes, and whatever you do, make sure that you film the funeral. And I was like, oh my God. I hire a stringer who showed up with unmarked cameras, meaning there were no call letters from a news station, no Hard Copy logo on it. It was just plain black cameras. So I interviewed the guy. We did our interview, met his family, everything was great. And then he thought I left back to LA. Well, reality was I was waiting for the funeral to occur so that we could film. We parked across the street on public domain, so we had the right to do that, right across from the funeral home. And I was in a van, and I was hunkered down because the guy couldn't see me because he knew who I was. And there were cameramen with cameras that were unmarked. They were taking the coffin, they were hauling the coffin down this little walkway. The camera crew was right across the street, and the man who I'd interviewed, the father, had turned around and yelled at the camera crew and said, don't film, put your cameras down. And they wouldn't do it because they were instructed by me not to, because I had a job to do. The man was very emotional, upset. His daughter was dead, and he got so mad that he took off running, and he ran across the street, and he attacked one of the camera crew. And he was crying, and some family members came and got him, and they went on their way. We did what we had to do. We caught it on camera. We caught the whole thing on camera, and that's all we needed. So I get back to LA, and I'm talking to the guy, and he tells me about this crazy camera crew that filmed the funeral. And I said, well, you know, I said, the executive producer of this show somehow got that footage. I don't know how they got the footage, because it certainly wasn't me, as I promised that I wouldn't do that. And I said, so I'm going to edit the story, but I just want you to know, if that footage shows up in the story, that it's not something I'm in control of. I cannot control that. That's the decision of the executive producer. And he said, well, I hope that doesn't happen because, you know, he goes, nothing personal, but I'll sue them. And I said, well, I don't blame you. And we hung up, and I was thinking, you know, you think you'll sue them, but Hard Copy had those problems all the time. We've had shutdowns, we had bomb threats because of the nature of the stories that we did. Did we lie about the stories? No, but we embellished the truth, we manipulated, and not because we're mean people, but because we had a job to do. You know, this guy's already under a lot of stress, and then he thinks he's going to sue, but he doesn't understand. He's not suing hard copy, he's suing Paramount Pictures. And if you have any idea how many years you would be stuck in the courtroom, and they would take your life savings before you could ever start a lawsuit with them. So, and I knew that, but I couldn't say that to the guy. The story aired, and the guy called me back and he said he thought I did a wonderful job with the story, but he was really disappointed because I didn't have any say-so over the funeral footage, and the funeral footage was in the story. And I told him I was really sorry about that, and he said, you know, he goes, you're one of the most genuine people that I've met. I've done so many interviews about the death of my daughter and what happened, and he goes, you're most genuine. And he goes, I want to thank you, Tuffy, for treating me the way I should be treated. That was the end of that. So we hang up, and then I went up to the executive producer and told him I'll never do another story like that again. I didn't want to lose my job, but till this day that guy doesn't know what happened unless he happens to see this footage, which is highly doubtful. So it teaches a person what boundaries you can or can't cross. And with that said, coming from a reality TV background and a hard news background, when Trump was campaigning the first time around, I don't hate Trump. I think he's a great celebrity. He makes me laugh, and he was great on Celebrity Apprentice and all that. But I remember some of his campaign rallies, and he says what the normal, common, average person wants to